Hi, everyone. My name is Alice Shang, and I am the Global Head of AI Ethics at Sony Group and the Lead Research Scientist for AI Ethics in Sony AI. In my roles, I lead our AI Ethics Office, which is the entity responsible for working with our business and research units on operationalizing our AI ethics guidelines. And I also lead a lab of research scientists working on cutting edge research on fairness, transparency, and accountability in AI. It is my pleasure and honor to join all of you today for our 50th anniversary of STEPH, and I look forward to working with all of you in terms of AI ethics. For today's AI ethics session, the agenda will be as follows. So first, I will briefly discuss why AI ethics is so important for Sony, and then provide a summary of our AI ethics initiatives to date. And then we'll transition to some external keynote presentations, starting with Natasha Crampton, who is the Chief Responsible AI Officer at Microsoft. And then we'll have a keynote from Pascal Fung, who is the Chair Professor at the Department of Electronic and Computer Engineering at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. We will then have a panel discussion with Natasha, Pascal, Kitano-san, our CTO, and myself. And this will be moderated by Michael Spranger, who is the COO of Sony AI. So to start out, I will briefly discuss why AI ethics is so important for Sony. So if we look at the big trends right now in the AI space, we see, on the one hand, growing expectations and rapidly developing AI technologies. Across a wide variety of different businesses and different functions, AI is increasingly being used across industry. At the same time, though, we also see growing anxiety and debates around the social acceptability of AI technologies. And this has been motivated by an increasing number of cases where AI has affected individuals' lives, property, human rights, and privacy. This in turn has led to many movements by both governments and companies to address AI governance and has also informed our work at Sony, which I will discuss in greater detail. So to start out, the use of AI is becoming increasingly ubiquitous in a wide range of applications that are relevant to Sony. So from optimizing camera settings to CGI for movies, to recommending and generating music and images, to creating avatars that might serve as the basis for the metaverse. Given all of these potential use cases of AI, we must also be very mindful of potential unintended consequences of AI technologies. And indeed, we have seen many applications across industry that have led to legal issues or damages to companies' reputations. Some examples to note include Amazon's resume filtering algorithm. There was an internal tool that was discovered to systematically downgrade female applicants, leading Amazon to eventually scrap this tool. In addition, facial recognition technologies have sparked significant controversy, and multiple firms have had lawsuits brought against them for allegedly violating biometric use regulations. In 2021, for example, Facebook paid $650 million in a settlement for the use of face scans in their tag suggestions technology, which they have since discontinued. In addition, in 2015, Google Photos image recognition algorithm was found to produce racist results, and the company publicly apologized for this mistake and has since been working to improve their image recognition algorithm. These potential harms have also led to growing regulation of AI. And this has included both AI-specific regulation, like the proposed EU AI Act, which would significantly increase the requirements around transparency, fairness, and accountability for AI technologies, especially high-risk AI, to guidance from the FTC in the United States around AI usage, to more specific regulation by sector. In particular, there has been AI-specific regulation in the insurance and employment sectors, among others. In addition, existing regulations such as biometric information protections have become especially relevant in an age of AI. When we think of AI technologies that process images, videos, or audio that might feature humans, immediately there become concerns about potential biometric information being collected, processed, or stored. And this has in turn also led to many lawsuits around the use of AI technologies that process such biometric information. In addition, existing privacy and data protection laws have also gained increasing importance in the age of AI, given the key role of data within AI development and usage. And so, in particular, we see a lot of relevance from the EU GDPR, China's new Personal Information Protection Law, and also Japan's amended Act on the Protection of Personal Information. This in turn has informed our work at Sony in terms of AI ethics. So our goals for AI ethics at Sony are fourfold. First off, our goal is to maintain and expand our competitiveness through sustainable growth for our Sony AI businesses. In order for AI to grow in a way that's sustainable, we must take care of AI ethics issues and, in particular, evaluate and mitigate any of these concerns. We need to work together to prevent harms that could lead to legal, reputational, or ethical risks for the company. In addition, we need to work together to make sure that Sony's technologies work well for everyone. As a leading global technology company, it's critical that our technologies don't just work for certain demographics or certain jurisdictions, but instead work well for a global audience. Finally, our goal is to not just have Sony keep up to date with the latest AI ethics practices, but rather to establish Sony as a leader in ethical AI. Sony should be the benchmark for best practices in AI ethics, and AI ethics should be one of our competitive advantages. This leads me to our progress to date around AI ethics. So since 2018, we have made great strides in this direction. We were actually one of the first major technology companies to release AI ethics guidelines back in 2018. And the following year, our AI Ethics Steering Committee was established, and the direction was set by Yoshida-san that all AI products should be evaluated for ethics concerns. That led to many pilot assessments and eventually the official establishment of the AI Ethics Office, and also the launch of our mandatory AI ethics assessment process for our electronics products. Since then, we have evaluated over 100 cases within Sony. So in terms of our AI ethics guidelines, as I mentioned, these were established back in 2018 and have since been updated. One key component of this is the definition of AI. So the guidelines define AI expansively as any functionality or its enabling technology that performs information processing for various purposes that people perceive as intelligent, and that is embodied by machine learning based on data or by rules or knowledge extracted in some methods. And the motivation for this broader definition is that even though some people, when they think of AI, they only think of highly futuristic technologies, the reality is when we think of our AI ethics guidelines in terms of supporting creative lifestyles, building a better society, stakeholder engagement, providing trusted products and services, and respecting privacy, fairness, and transparency, and supporting the ongoing evolution of AI and education, all of these apply regardless of whether we're talking about highly futuristic AI technologies or more basic AI technologies that might be often referred to as data mining or data science. Oftentimes, the concerns at the end of the day are the same, and many of the strategies for addressing these concerns are similar as well. So moving now from our AI ethics guidelines to our AI ethics steering committee, which was established in 2019. The committee is comprised of senior executive leaders within Sony who examine AI use cases and ensure compliance with our Sony Group AI ethics guidelines. The committee consists of diverse representation of legal, technological, and business interests. And the overall goals are to promote the appropriate use of AI throughout Sony Group, and also to work closely with business units and research and development teams to develop solutions to address any issues or concerns. In terms of how we conduct our AI ethics assessments, AI ethics by design has been a key organizing principle. So what that means is we don't see AI ethics as something that should just be checked at the final stage of development, but instead something that needs to be baked into every aspect of the product development lifecycle. So we have checkpoints at the planning, design, production, and shipment stages. And this is all important because many of the AI ethics issues are quite easy to address in the early stages, but very difficult to address in later stages. And so by starting early, we hope that we can partner with business units to find viable solutions instead of having to grapple with these issues much later on. And as previously mentioned, over 100 cases have been conducted and high-risk use cases have been submitted and reviewed by the AI Ethics Committee. In addition to these internal initiatives, we have also established many external collaborations. Sony has engaged with the Partnership on AI, Global Partnership on AI, and also Yoshida-san, our CEO, sits on a council of CEOs as part of the Center for Strategic and International Studies AI Council, which is oriented towards providing recommendations for the upcoming G7. We also have been very involved with Japan's Keidanren in terms of the social principles for human-centric AI and the AI utilization strategy. And we've also been very involved with the ACM Conference on Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency. This past year, I served as one of their general chairs. In addition to the governance work we have done, we also established the AI Ethics Research Flagship within Sony AI. And the goal of this research lab is to work towards socio-technical solutions to help our business units develop AI in a way that's more fair, transparent, and accountable. We grapple with fundamental questions about what counts as ethical AI and how do we get closer to that. And our goal for impact here is to affect AI development across Sony, but also impact the academic research communities and industry best practices more generally. So given that the STEF exhibition will be starting soon, I also wanted to provide a brief preview of some of the research projects that will be featured from the AI ethics team at Sony AI. First, we have a project on human-centric visual diversity auditing, which is led by Jerome Andrews, who is a research scientist on my team. The motivation for this project is that data diversity is very important for addressing potential biases in AI. When we look at human-centric computer vision, often biases are due to models being trained on highly skewed data sources. Checking for diversity, however, is often difficult since it's quite common to have large data sets that are not labeled with demographic attributes. In this paper, we train a model on odd one out face similarity judgments to learn a continuous human interpretable face embedding space. This model enables us to examine and compare the diversity of human faces in unlabeled datasets without using demographic attribute classifiers. Next, we have a project on skin tone diversity led by William Thong, who is also a research scientist on my team. In computer vision, the one-dimensional Fitzpatrick scale is the most commonly used scale for measuring skin tone diversity. But this scale was actually designed to measure skin tanning in Caucasian individuals rather than for measuring global human diversity. So in this paper, we present a novel system for extracting skin color from images and also a new scale for measuring skin color diversity, including both the hue angle and luminance. And our hope is that this scale will lead to a more nuanced use of skin color categorization for measuring biases in human-centric computer vision datasets and models. Finally, we have a paper on causal inference for fair machine learning led by Ida Ramatalabi, who is also a research scientist on my team. This paper adapts the potential outcomes framework from causal inference to derive causal variance of statistical fairness metrics and provides a framework for diagnosing and mitigating different sources of bias in ML models. Our study shows that existing statistical methods are quite susceptible to either under or overestimating biases due to sensitivity to spurious correlations. Now I would like to introduce our first external keynote speaker, Natasha Crampton. Natasha leads Microsoft's Office of Responsible AI as the company's first Chief Responsible AI Officer. The Office of Responsible AI puts Microsoft's principles into practice by defining, enabling, and governing the company's approach to responsible AI. The Office of Responsible AI also collaborates with stakeholders within and outside the company to shape new laws, norms, and standards to help ensure that the promise of AI technology is realized for the benefit of all. Prior to this role, Natasha served as lead counsel to the Aether Committee, Microsoft's advisory committee on responsible AI. Natasha also spent 7 years in Microsoft's Australian and New Zealand subsidiaries, helping Microsoft's highly regulated customers move to the cloud. Thank you so much, Natasha, for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me to speak at Sony's Technology Exchange Fair. I'm Natasha Crampton, Chief Responsible AI Officer at Microsoft. Today, I want to focus on a key question, which is, how do you govern AI? It's a simple question to ask, but it's a complex one to answer. It's complex because AI is not a single thing, but a constellation of technologies. And those technologies are evolving quickly. Even AI experts have been surprised by recent breakthroughs. It's also the case that AI technologies can be put to many different use cases with vastly different consequences. So using facial recognition on your phone to keep it secure is fundamentally different to using facial recognition to monitor a town square. And all of this is taking place in a changing world where societal expectations are evolving and the geopolitical landscape is in flux. At Microsoft, we recognize we've entered a new era of technology regulation. So as challenging as AI governance is, it's a pressing topic for us to address because AI is now all a part of our lives. Cutting-edge technology is not staying put in the labs. More and more it's being put to work in applications that affect us as individuals and members of society, from health to education, employment, and everything in between. At Microsoft, we started our AI governance work by developing a set of principles. We were in good company with Sony and many others. Today, there are more than 200 sets of principles that have been adopted around the world. One of the most encouraging things to me is that despite huge variation in ethical traditions around the globe, these frameworks show an overwhelming agreement about the need to prioritize issues like transparency, fairness, privacy, and security. And as we've grappled with some difficult AI governance questions at Microsoft, we come back to our principles time and time again to help us make decisions. So while our principles continue to serve as our essential North Star, we also recognize that principles alone are not enough. First, principles are not self-executing. You can believe that AI systems should be fair without that being the case. They're also open to interpretation. Ask 5 different people what fairness means, and you're likely to get 5 different answers. Principles do not answer the question of how. When we speak with our engineering teams, they are quick to agree that AI systems ought to be fair. What they then want to know is how they should be fair. They ask us questions like, what does fairness mean for the data that we need to collect? What does fairness mean for the testing that we need to do prior to releasing the technology? What does this mean for the information that we need to share with our customers? In reality, sustainable innovation ahead of the law requires guardrails to help secure the benefits of the technology and anticipate and mitigate their harms. You need to exercise foresight to imagine the good, the beneficial outcomes that you want to achieve. and also the bad, the ways in which things could go wrong and the people who could be affected. You also need to think about all of the levers that you have available to you to design and build the technology in ways that are human-centered and rights-respecting. A comprehensive approach is needed. At Microsoft, we've been taking a multifaceted approach to operationalizing our AI principles at scale. At the foundation is a strong governance structure to enable progress and accountability. Our responsible AI governance approach borrows from the hub and spoke model that has worked successfully to integrate privacy and security and accessibility into our products and services. Our hub combines experts in research and policy and engineering, and they are responsible for setting a consistent bar for responsible AI across the company, and they then empower the spokes to drive initiatives and be accountable for them. On top of this foundation of governance, we've developed rules that set out the requirements that our engineering teams must meet. Developing these rules has been a journey that has called on multidisciplinary expertise from across the company. We've recently made available our framework for building AI systems responsibly publicly. We call that framework our Responsible AI Standard. We did this to share what we have learned and to also empower our customers and partners like Sony with the practices we have developed. Beyond rules, we have made significant investments in training and processes. Some of those processes involve extra oversight for particularly high impact cases. Others are designed to ensure that we're not just building out a practice of responsible AI, but a culture of responsible innovation. We recognise that the vast majority of our employees today never went through any kind of ethics training, and that AI systems raise a type of question that Microsoft Word simply did not. So we need to help our teams build the muscle of asking ground zero questions, such as, why are we building this AI system? And is the AI technology at its core ready for this application? Last but not least, we have also invested in building engineering systems and tools. We think it's important to develop repeatable tools and patterns and practices where possible so that the creative thought of our engineering teams can be directed towards the most novel and unique challenges, not reinventing the wheel. So with that grounding in our approach to responsible AI at Microsoft, let's turn to a case study of how we have innovated responsibly ahead of the law. At Microsoft, we've developed some state-of-the-art synthetic voice technology. It allows you to create a voice that sounds very human-like. In fact, it is virtually indistinguishable from the original speaker in many cases. You might have come across earlier forms of this technology when you've called a customer service line and you've been guided through prompts using an automated voice. Often these voices sound very robotic and they are obviously machine generated. Our custom neural voice technology is fundamentally different. It produces a voice that is nearly identical to the original source. The promise of this technology is huge. We've already seen some exciting applications in the real world. AT&T developed an award-winning Bugs Bunny experience in their retail stores. Bugs was able to have real-time conversations with customers. Beyond fictional voices, we've seen some game-changing use cases in education. For example, authors reading their books in several different languages and producing content for people who are blind or low vision. But it's also easy to see how this technology could be used not just as a tool, but as a weapon. AI-generated deepfakes have already depicted heads of state speaking words they did not utter in languages they did not speak. And more broadly, trust in institutions is eroded when the public can't tell fact from fiction. And while the law has not caught up with these challenges, we've found that a considered design approach can help us secure the innovation and anticipate and mitigate its harms. Let's spend a few moments on how we went about our responsible AI process for custom neural voice. First, I want to highlight that our process is all about responsible AI by design. There are many different choices that we make as we design and build AI systems, and we need to keep humans and their fundamental rights front and center. For each of our AI principles, we've defined goals and requirements to help our teams know the steps they need to take to uphold our principles. Of course, cutting-edge technology like custom neural voice implicates all of our principles, but in the interest of time today, we're going to focus on accountability and transparency. For accountability, one of the key practices we've developed across the company is an impact assessment. This practice builds on data privacy impact assessments and human rights impact assessments and asks some fundamental questions about what we're building, for whom, and why. When we undertook this process for custom neural voice, we identified two critical objectives for the system. First, we needed to protect listeners from misleading content and experiences. And second, we needed to protect speakers from impersonation or improper use of their voices. This understanding of key objectives for the system then fed straight into the ways we communicated with different stakeholders. For voice actors and other speakers whose voices were going to be used to create the voice, it was important to us that we explain how the technology works so they can make informed decisions about participating in the process. We also needed to communicate with users of the technology to set clear expectations as to acceptable use cases. For example, we are supportive of smart assistants, customer service chatbots, and online learning scenarios with the right guardrails. But we prohibit use cases that would exploit or manipulate children. We also developed a series of controls that we baked into the technology itself. First and foremost, we decided that custom neural voice would be a limited access service. That means it's only available to certain customers for pre-approved use cases and with technical controls to guard against misuse. We also developed a transparency note to make sure we were clear about the capabilities and the limitations of the technology and the steps that users can take to use it responsibly. And finally, we have a watermarking feature in development that will help us know when content is generated using our technology. Together, these controls are important features of the product. They have helped our customers have confidence in the product, and we've been able to stay ahead of its misuse. So when we saw the first signs that the law in Europe was starting to evolve and catch up with the unique risks of synthetic voices, it was encouraging to see the European lawmakers required exactly the type of disclosure that we had already conceived of for custom neural voice and had developed design patterns for. Now, there's no question in my mind that the law will continue to evolve and it won't always land in the places that we anticipate. But what the custom neural voice example illustrates is that it is possible to innovate on the cutting edge and to get to an outcome that is supportive of regulation. And that, in my view, is something that we aspire to do more broadly if we want to build technology that warrants trust. Stepping back and looking across our Responsible AI program, perhaps the most important thing that we have accomplished under the leadership of our CEO, Satya Nadella, and President Brad Smith, is to build a culture of collaboration across the organization around creating AI responsibly. We are shifting mindsets that see responsible AI as a compliance tax, and instead we are making stronger, more trustworthy products that delight our customers and earn their trust. We're doing this work in a very multidisciplinary way. It relies on cutting-edge research and deep product knowledge and engineering systems, as well as the policy and governance work that my team leads. It's clear to me that when you combine these disciplines and work across diverse teams, you get a product that is much greater than the sum of its parts. Responsible AI is a journey, and it will require a lot of hard and deliberative work. We're committed to sharing our learning and welcome ongoing conversations and collaborations with Sony. It's been a pleasure to speak with you today at the Sony Technology Exchange Fair. Please accept my warmest congratulations on this year 2022, marking your 50th anniversary. Domo arigatou gozaimasu.
Thank you very much for that insightful speech, Natasha. It is now my pleasure to introduce our second external keynote speaker, Pascal Fung. Pascal Fung is the chair professor at the Department of Electronic and Computer Engineering at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. She is also a visiting professor at the Central Academy of Fine Arts in Beijing. She is an elected fellow of the Association for the Advancement of Artificial Intelligence. She's an elected fellow of AAAI, ACL, and IEEE. She's also the director for the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology's Center for AI Research, an interdisciplinary research center on top of all 4 schools at the university, and she co-founded the Human Language Technology Center. She is an affiliated faculty with the Robotics Institute and the Big Data Institute at the university as well. Thank you so much, Pascal, for joining us today.
Hello, my talk today is titled Towards Value-Based Natural Language Processing. There are many definitions of beneficial AI, ethics of AI, and ethical AI and responsible AI. Beneficial AI, as we know, are applications that benefit human and society. Ethical AI are systems and applications that satisfy ethical principles and standards. Whereas ethics of AI is the study of ethics pertaining to AI development applications. And more recently, we're talking about responsible AI, which is the operationalization of ethical AI with science and technology beyond legal requirements. There are 2 aspects of RAI. One is to mitigate harm in the human society, often intentional, online. The second aspect is actually to prevent often unintentional harm that results from AI systems and algorithms. Responsible AI consists of these different dimensions. They include robustness, safety, fairness, inclusion, transparency and control, privacy and security, accountability and governance, as well as user agency, trust, well-being, and sustainability. These are the principles of responsible AI that most organizations agree upon today. Now, the core challenge of value-aligned NLP or value-aligned AI in general is twofold. One is that what are these values or human values and who gets to define them? Second is how can NLP algorithms and models or AI models be made to align with these values? So what are these desirable human values and who defines them? There are many organizations and governments that have already published lists of desirable ethical principles and standards. It is, however, necessary that we anticipate value definition to be dynamic and multidisciplinary. We need to modularize the set of value definitions as external to the development of AI algorithms, which will enable computer scientists to work better together with philosophers, ethicists, and other humanists. First of all, human values are culturally dependent and dynamic. A statement such as women should be protected by men is deemed sexist if the value is non-discriminatory. It is not deemed as sexist if the value of the culture is chivalry. The famous trolley problem, where a person is asked to choose to divert the tram from the main track to save 5 people by killing the workers on the other track. They also, this is an ethical dilemma problem, and the answer depends on the human values. Therefore, there are multiple perspectives to these human values. Human values can also be described in natural language. This is the example of Chinese AI ethical principles versus EU AI key requirements. There are many overlaps, but there are also different priorities. Yet they are described in language. Human values are also multidimensional. For example, sexism has many categories ranging from role stereotyping, attribute stereotyping, to pay gap, hostile work environment, so on and so forth. And so sexism is not just one value. The first case study I wish to show is a human value aligned classification problem. where we are using a classifier to classify this statement, women should be protected by men. However, with additional human value that's explicitly written in or input by system users or philosophers and moral philosophers. And the classifier would take description of these different dimensions of values. And we use a prompt-based value-aligned data generation from large language models with these values to train a model that takes value, the statement of value, as an explicit variable in addition to the input, and gives different output given different value, different ethical principles. And as the evaluation, we show that our value-aligned models works better and equally well as human judgment. Another case study is on human value-aligned generation. Using the same example as the trolley problem, if a user asks the question whether we should choose to kill one person in order to save many other people, now, according to different moral philosophy approach, it is acceptable or not acceptable. So there are perspectives from the ontological perspective and utilitarianism. So we want to construct a QA system that again takes these values as explicit input and then gives the answer as a moral principle discussion rather than a yes or no answer. So again, the system is called AI Socrates. It takes given the question, it looks up on different ethical principles. And then given this principle and the question, it provides different answers concatenated together as in the form of an ethicist. So you can stop the video and look at the example. Here is given this question, humans can choose these two relevant principles, whereas automatic selection also found two similar principles. Step 2, given these values and principles, this is an automatic answer generated. You can stop the video and read the answer yourself. It makes sense according to the two different principles, though it's not always that coherent. And according to the model selector principles, again, you can stop the video and look at the answers. It's also answering from two different moral philosophical approaches and perspectives to the answer to the trolley question. So when we ask humans to judge these machine output answers against that of a human ethicist, using the evaluation set of ethical columnists from the New York Times, we saw that human evaluators found the system output to be just as multi-perspective and just as well supported by reasoning as human ethicists. However, it is not as fluent and coherent. So there's still room for improvement of such systems. This is just a tiny little experiment as a case study. Another case study I want to show is that in making the speech recognition system to be more inclusive, this is a project I did at Meta as a consultant. We want to make the speech recognizers to be inclusive. It works equally well for all demographic groups. However, the constraint in RAI is that we cannot use metadata. We cannot use any information related to demographics because we need to preserve privacy. We cannot even use utterance embeddings because that also has some characteristics of the speaker. So we were forced to therefore innovate, and we use a blind clustering methodology where we cluster these utterances. And this clustering will show the gender separation and accent separation automatically. And then we use these cluster labels instead of the original embedding in the training. And then in the decoding, we give every utterance will give the unknown cluster label, and decoding then carries on, and it will automatically find the correct cluster and performs speech recognition on these cluster utterances. And the results show that it improved the ASR performance on all demographic groups, and on odd accents without actually using metadata. So in conclusion, responsible AI provides new research opportunities, and human values are dynamic, cultural, contextual, multidimensional, and multi-perspective. We need to decouple value definition from value alignment engineering. Human values provide additional constraints to optimization problems in AI engineering, but they also provide new opportunities for innovation. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks so much for these exciting keynotes. We now have a panel with our keynote speakers, plus Kitano-san, and the panel will be divided into 3 parts. We will discuss current issues in AI ethics, specifically in terms of what are some of the current topics that researchers and organizations deal with as we deploy AI technology. We will then talk a little bit about the special relation of AI ethics research and AI ethics in industry. And finally, we'll talk about what are the topics that will shape the future of AI ethics and AI. And we'll start out with sort of the current state of AI. As you know, there are many recent high-profile AI ethics-related discussions in the news. We are seeing that issues like face detections and others have led to high-profile legislation, litigation, and also business decisions. And I'd like to talk to each of you about where you see the main issues today in AI ethics and how they impact your environment, be they commercial or academic. And I wanted to start out with something very concrete. I know that Natasha has been leading responsible AI initiatives across Microsoft for some time now, and specifically leading key decisions on how Microsoft deals with, for example, face analysis and recognition tools, and also emotional voice synthesis. So Natasha, it would be great if you could talk a little bit about the decisions that you've been involved in, the motivation and the impact on your community, and especially also how the company arrived at these decisions, if that's possible.
Well, thanks so much, Mika-san, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here to help Sony celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Technology Exchange Fair. There's really been no issue that's been more central to the development of our responsible AI positions at Microsoft than facial recognition technology. And we really started way back in 2018, trying to understand the issues associated with this technology. Initially, actually, we had a problem on our hands. Our facial recognition technology in inferring gender was not working as well as it should have been across all demographic groups. And so that really piqued our interest in facial recognition technology, and we started to study it really deeply. We worked hard to solve those bias problems that we had in terms of the equal performance of the technology across different demographic groups. But there were other issues as well. We were concerned about the use of facial recognition, the potential for new intrusions on privacy. We were also concerned about the extent to which there might be mass surveillance using facial recognition if, in fact, there were no guardrails put in place. So after studying, both the beneficial uses of this technology and the situations we wanted to avoid, as a company, we did 2 things. First, actually, we did something that was perhaps a little bit unusual for a technology company. We actually called for regulation. We said there actually needs to be a societal conversation around the use of this technology, and we need new laws. But we also realized that, the process of forming laws and creating those laws takes time. And so as a company, we actually adopted a series of 6 principles, which we've since used to guide our work. So additional bias testing, preparing transparency reports so that we can help our customers understand what are the suitable use cases and which are the inappropriate use cases. But as you mentioned, Mika, that really the next frontier of our work on facial recognition has really involved looking at the analysis part of the technology. And in particular, we really looked closely at whether it was actually an appropriate use of facial recognition technology to infer somebody's emotion by scanning their face. And ultimately, we concluded that that was not an appropriate use of facial recognition. We had the benefit of lots of research, both from within Microsoft and also externally. And what the research told us was that there's actually no scientific consensus on the definition of emotions to begin with. There's also huge cross-cultural variation in the way that we express emotion. And also we were concerned about some of the privacy concerns that arise when someone is sort of trying to infer your emotional state from the expression that you're making on your face. So ultimately, we decided that it wasn't an appropriate use for our facial recognition technology to be making available this emotion recognition technology on a general purpose basis. So we made a business decision to pull that technology back from being made available on a general purpose basis. Now, as with many issues that we work through on our Responsible AI program, there are also, situations where beneficial uses of that technology still exist. So, for example, in accessibility scenarios, that can provide very, very valuable information to people who may be blind or low vision. So, we've put some guardrails around what we think are those narrow acceptable use cases, but otherwise we made that decision to say, actually, this technology is not fit for purpose in this scenario, and therefore we're now in a process where we are retiring that capability from our general purpose technology.
Wow, that's very, very interesting. And Alice, I know you are also working a lot on the Sony side on regulations, and well, we don't have a lot of things that are public, but maybe you can comment a little bit on your view essentially on how these things might develop in the broader ecosystem of a company like Sony, which obviously has many touch points with Microsoft, but is also active in some other domains.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Mika. So I think what's quite interesting in the AI ethics space at the moment is we're really seeing the maturation of this field from being something that is really primarily more on the technical research side to considering a lot of these questions of AI governance and how do we actually operationalize AI ethics in practice, and how do we think about legal conformity within this context? And so in terms of our work at Sony, so at the end of the day, Sony is an entertainment and technology company. And so it's very important that folks are able to feel trust and confidence that the products that we use do not harbor significant AI ethics issues. And so we see a ton of promise in terms of AI, in terms of how it can expand the ways in which we deliver entertainment to customers. But in order to address these concerns around the harms around AI, one thing that's been really important in our development is setting up mandatory compliance processes. In particular, we have these at the moment for our electronics products. And that's been quite critical because we don't want to only look at certain very high-risk AI use cases, but we want to make sure that even in situations where the harm in each individual case might not be that high, that we're able to ensure that when it comes to issues like bias and transparency, we are holding very high standards across the board. Because many of these low-risk issues can come together in terms of making an experience, especially an entertainment experience, negative for the user. And so as a result, I think it's very important for us that we have these sorts of AI ethics assessment processes in place. And also we're trying to explore as well on the research side of things, how to ensure that we have solutions in place such that our developers are able to develop such technologies that comply with our legal and ethical requirements without having to reinvent the wheel every time or do the development from scratch.
Great. And thanks very much, Alice. And I'd like to bring in Pascal here as a researcher, actually, probably mainly head as a researcher. I know you've worked a lot on AI ethics, and you also have recent publications by your group on data sets, some of these actually together with industry. What are some of the key challenges and opportunities you see today in AI ethics, and what gets you most excited or maybe most scared about the work that you're doing today?
Actually, Natasha just brought up a very, very good case study and point about the tension between making AI beneficial to people and making sure it's responsible use. And I think this is the biggest challenge we face today. There are a lot of AI ethical principles, guidelines issued by different governments and different organizations. There has been like over 100 published since 2017. And each company has its own guidelines. And as Natasha just explained, and as well, that they have their own considerations and they want to ensure compliance with the law. However, I think interpretation of AI principles is very, very, very difficult. I think it's the first time in the history of technology where we have such a stringent requirement for technology to be really responsible when it's being used by humans. So the example of facial emotion recognition, for example, is it's something that I worked on. So my main field of research has been over 30 years on conversational AI systems, and in recent years, it's more in particular empathetic AI systems. So we want to build robots, for example, to help patients, help the elderly with dementia and so on. And there, it's important for the machine to be able to detect the emotion, the negative emotions and of the user. So there we need to use, in fact, facial emotion recognition for that purpose. Because when human health care workers interact with the patients and elderlies, they gauge their state of well-being by looking at their emotion expressions. So we have to use that. In fact, the hospitals we collaborate with want us to use that. So now, how do you then? So in terms of research, of course, we continue to push the research for it to be more accurate. But then the challenge is there, as Natasha mentioned, different cultural settings and different contexts will have different definitions of emotion. So in our case, when we're limited to a particular use case, such as dementia detection, then we can very well work with the specialist in the field to define what it is. And there we can therefore ensure the responsible use of facial emotional recognition technology. So this is a very good case study because today we can no longer, as researchers or developers, like we used to do, we just build a technology and don't think about it and assume it's beneficial, right? So today, this process is, there's a lot of human value consideration. There's a lot of value-based design involved before we deploy anything. And I think that is a very good thing. But we need to have this continuous discussion. And it's not like one time we discuss it and that's how we implement it. But I think the principle and ethical principle definition and its implementation and operationalization will continue to be a continuous feedback loop, one informing the other. So I think it is important for people who work on governance and people who work on AI system and algorithm building to continue to have this kind of feedback. And thank you for inviting us, therefore, to this panel.
And thanks very much. And there are already very meaningful topics touched upon by everybody. And I'd like to turn it over to Kitano-san, since you are the CTO of Sony with a responsibility to the organization, also from the viewpoint of commercial success. What do you think is the role of AI ethics today in a wider organization like Sony with so many different business areas and many things that also already the panel mentioned, including things around emotions, that I think is also a key term for Sony. So how do you see the role of AI ethics in the larger context of a large organization like Sony?
Well, thank you, Mika. And also, I would like to say thank you very much for Natasha and Pascal for joining our panel, which actually is celebrating a 50th anniversary of the STEF, Sony Technology Exchange Forum. And I think the topic of this AI ethics is really important. Because the AI is getting such a powerful technology. Any powerful technology that will influence the society, influence someone's life, was someone's decision. But we need to be actually safeguarded in a way that the proper use of technology, which technically sound also like acceptable in a society, is required. Not just like AI, but also like I'm biologist as well. In biological area, we have like a bioethics field. Bioethics, like whenever you do the biological research, even though you are not targeting like using a human as a subject, you have to go through the bioethics. What can be done? What is okay? What is not okay for like animal welfare issues or like a safety issues, and what kind of a genome you can modify or not. So that is the in a huge field. I actually created the Sony Bioethics Committee over a decade ago, and also if you are moving into the human subject experiment, there is strict guideline what you can do, and this is getting more serious because like you were talking about like intervening human being, although your real target is actually drug discovery or new therapy, but trying to actually make something better to try to cure the disease. But still, we have to have like a very strict. You have to go through a strict regulation. Now, biology is getting into the era that you can modify the genome. Now, then it's getting a critical problem where you are trying to explore what kind of modification you can make it to the human or the animal. So what are the cells? But it's getting really serious. So I think like it's just like it's just that's all because like a biotechnology is getting very, very powerful. But I think the same thing happening in AI. Before we have like this is like a current revolution in AI, like a deep learning and in all kind of technology, which actually is seriously influencing our society and the industry. We haven't talked about it. There we're talking about Asimov's 3 principle, but like those discussions has not been in the industry or society as like one of the first priority issues, because AI technology was there and useful, but it was limited to usefulness. But now AI is getting so powerful that we all recognize, wow, my God, this will be a great opportunity. At the same time, if we misuse this technology, this is going to be a disaster. So I think this is a reflection of the progress of AI as well. So at the same time, for the company like Sony, we would like to make a best use of AI, but this is going to be extremely powerful tool. I think like all the tech companies would agree, this is a core technology to bring a business forward. At the same time, any misuse of technology will be, cause substantial damage, not only to our users and the society, but also like that will have a serious repercussion in the credibility of the company. But therefore, like AI ethics and responsible AI is high priority issue for the Sony Group Corporation. Well, that is why we appointed Alice as a head of global lead of the AI ethics, because we need someone who take care globally and responsible on this. So this is really our symbolic move. But at the same time, I think like the fact that we are taking the AI ethics seriously and actually implementing in the business process, which we do, is a proof that we care about the quality, and that is a proof of the quality of the service. That because our AI is supposed to be at least making the best effort to be fair and transparent and responsible. I think this is pretty much a standard, and I think all the discussion here today has really pointed to that direction. Also, many organizations like a partnership on the AI and GPAI and OECD, and all the discussion, all the directly with the other companies like we have today, is actually really a nice, forum or opportunity to actually share the experience and get the consensus on the where we should go. Because this is AI is in a way this is the common goods. But this technology should be best used for the humankind. All these our civilizations. So I think all the discussion across the boundaries, industry, academia, different companies, different countries. I think it's really critical. And then in a sense, I'd like to thank all of you again for participating in this discussion. This is going to be a very important discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Kitano-san. And you actually touched upon something that I wanted to dive deeper into, which is this relationship that exists in biology to some extent between ethics and the research field, but maybe even stronger, can be developed in the field of artificial intelligence and AI ethics, which I don't think is necessarily unique as a field, how it has evolved from academia to industry and back. But it certainly, to me, feels very special in the way that academia and industry interact specifically around ethical issues. And so I'd be interested in the panel's opinion on this interaction between academia and industry, sort of who's driving the conversation, and also maybe why it is important that academia has a big role in what we do in industry. And so maybe I'll turn it first to Pascal, who, of course, as a researcher, you think a lot about AI ethics and research, but as I already mentioned, you also have industry collaboration. So it would be great to hear your take on this relationship between industry and academia, and how does the information flow, and also what do you think is the responsibility of academia versus industry?
Yeah, thank you. So yes, as you mentioned, I've been collaborating with the industry, and I've seen that different companies will have different priorities given their product and service lines, obviously. So, and I also see that in the industry, there's usually a very tight timeline to implement something. All right, when there's some feedback from the customer, or when there's a regulation or regulator requirement, they have to comply. And there's a really tight timeline for implementing, not just to interpret, but to implement something. So the priority is different. And in the university, therefore, we have the luxury of having to take a more higher level overview. For example, we have in our university, we have under the Center of AI Research, we have a joint lab with Cambridge University on AI governance and ethics. And then we also have a joint lab with other parties on AI health. There we can actually take a more global view of looking at different AI ethics principles from China, from Japan, from the US, EU, and compare them, and come up with some kind of papers and white papers, and of which we can then use to inform the regulators as well as the industry practitioners, right? And in addition, so we have a lot of this, I already talked about the facial emotional recognition issue, right? That we have this particular concern in the industry, whereas in academia, again, we can collaborate with the public health institutions to, do research and development of such technology in a context that is responsible and beneficial. So I do think that we have slightly different roles, and there's a lot of overlap in terms of AI research, and there's also a lot of overlap in terms of AI ethics research. But the industry and academic partnership is very, very important. And in addition, in academia, academia doesn't have this kind of resources the industry has. So it's impossible for academic research to come up with large pre-trained language models, like those powerful models. They all come from the industry. Now, so academics, then we are. So we have this constraint of resources, but it's also important for us to do research on AI and beneficial AI under such constraint, because we cannot assume that all AI applications, especially in the resource poor countries, can afford to come up with these large language models or large models that industry can come up with. So the AI development, the development of AI technology cannot be limited to only those companies with lots of resources, such as Sony, such as Microsoft, and so on. So academic research, then, I actually welcome this constraint, because I think it's important that we work on different approaches in machine learning and AI algorithms. And we also work on problems that are more longer term, right, with more sustainable solutions. This is not to say that in industry they don't work on long-term research. There are also a lot of industry labs. For example, MSRA does a lot of responsible AI research, right? So again, they collaborate closely with academia. So, and I would also want to say that academia doesn't mean just universities. There are a lot of academic research in the industry research labs. So, but yes, we do have slightly different roles. And then I think this collaboration is very, very important. Now, from the academic side, as a researcher, we also want to be informed by the practical problems that we're facing. So we're not solving responsible AI problems that we came up with in our own head and just like kind of, we think. So I've had experience working with some product researchers, I call them applied researchers in Meta, for example, on some ASR problems. And I thought, I have this solution that I've always thought about. And then turns out there are other constraints, with the privacy laws and so on. So that forced us to innovate. And we came up with new algorithms to preserve privacy as well as to improve equality, inclusiveness, and robustness for, in that case, it was ASR systems. So I think that kind of constraint from the industry and product side also ground our research academia. So I think this collaboration is mutually beneficial and ultimately beneficial to the users and to the society.
Oh, well, that's great. And I'm sure, Alice, also because you are moving between these worlds, you can sort of comment on your view on this connection and how you take research results into industry, and also how your industrial experience informs the research that you're doing in the different groups that you're leading.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Mika. So first, to echo Pascal, I think it's incredibly important in the AI ethics realm for there to be a very close collaboration between industry and academia. And part of this is because if we look at the evolution of AI ethics, really even just 5 years ago, there was not much of a conception of AI ethics, responsible AI, algorithmic fairness, explainability. All of these things were still extremely nascent at that time. And so whereas in many commercial realms, maybe there's a 5-year lag, 10-year lag even between research and operationalization, we don't really have that luxury in the AI space. It's moving extremely fast, and the need to do AI ethics is moving extremely fast as well. And so as a result, we can't just rely on slowly catching up to research over time, but instead we must ensure that the work we're doing within the company is really up with the state of the art in terms of ethics best practices. And this is something that is not just something that is imposed by ethics guidelines or legal guidelines or something like that. It's something that we also see in terms of a need among practitioners, because nobody wants to develop AI that causes societal harm or is unethical in any way. And so oftentimes the issue we encounter in more of the compliance side of our AI ethics work is not so much apathy, but instead a desire for solutions that can be implemented. And in order for us to provide that for our businesses, it's important that we have a close relationship with academic researchers and we're staying abreast of the latest research. And so some things we've done to that end within Sony are, so we have a lot of direct relationships in terms of research and academia in terms of collaborations there. Also this past year, I was the general chair of the ACM Conference of Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency. So we give back to the academic community in those ways, and also work to build the academic community around these sorts of fairness, accountability, transparency issues. In addition, I think we have a unique setup within Sony with both the AI ethics compliance arm and also the AI ethics research lab being combined under one umbrella and having me have purview over both. And I think that's quite important to basically shorten the lag between those two areas. We want to ensure that the work we do in terms of research is directly informed by the issues that we see emerging from the business units, and that any solutions we find either developed by ourselves or that we see from the literature can very immediately be shared with our business units. And that's something that's quite important for our function in terms of the AI Ethics Office, sharing that subject matter expertise. And I think one area that really typifies this kind of goes back a little bit to some of the discussion that both Natasha and Pascal were having around facial analysis technology, facial recognition technologies. That's a whole area where there is a tremendous need for more work and more collaboration among industry and academia, given that we see such an ethical minefield of legal issues, of cost constraints, of many challenges that cannot be solved simply by industry or academia in isolation. And so we're excited to have all this work going and to continue partnering and expanding our collaborations with both academic researchers and also folks across industry.
Thanks, Alice. And so Kitano-san, you already mentioned a little bit about your background in biology. And obviously, there's maybe many things that we can learn from biology, but I was kind of curious about your take on sort of similarities, but maybe also differences that you see in these fields, because, in many ways, AI touches upon, kind of other issues that are also very, very important. So what do you think we can learn from biology here, and what needs to be developed separately or independently, or what is the focus of AI ethics that might be special?
Yeah. Well, in biology, I think we have like a long history of like a bioethics, and then also of the discussion about like how much we can modify our genome, for example. And that's kind of a most recent topic, which because we get technology like a CRISPR-Cas9 and IPS, so we have a technology to be able to do that. And I think similarity is like as I mentioned previously, this is such a powerful technology, has a broad impact, and I think that's why we need like some kind of like a standard, some kind of ethical guideline, even for the experiment, lab scale, but that is critically important. At the same time, like biology, unless you have this kind of a guideline, someone can actually come up with like extremely lethal and highly infectious virus, for example. We can just discharge it. So at least we want to safeguard for that. And then also there are several protocols, procedures which might harm people. So like we have to make sure like researchers intentionally, unintentionally not go in that direction. Of course, like most researchers goodwill don't really think about this. At the same time, like this is such a complicated system. So like a researcher may actually step into that turf without noticing that. So like a bioethics committee or like all the guidelines which set up, this is actually one way is safeguarding that kind of mistake, and then have the broader experts on the panel, but not just like biologists, also like people in legal and anthropology, and then more the societal, and then also like general public as well. We have to have like a representative of so general public to assess the reflect the view of the someone who's not really the expert, but how people will feel and how people will react and perceive them. But I think like that is like how biology is kind of not settled down at this moment. It's a well-established field. But I think AI ethics is pretty much the same in a way that it does impact the our society, impact people's life. If some of the technology misused and they get the face recognition module and going into like a misuse randomly, and then I think like that will have like a significant impact. So I think like pretty much the same. I mean, it's in a way biology is more the on a material, AI is more the information space, but I think like impact is the same. But and also like another similarity is like in order to assess the impact and then try to create a guideline, even for the specific cases, you have to understand technology in depth. At the same time, that is not enough. You have to have a legal implication, societal implication, and possibly sometimes like anthropological implications and cultural implications as well. But you need really the broad expertise to combine together to understand what this technology means, and if this is a proper use and if that is a misuse. So therefore, I think it's really important that like a collaboration with industry and academia, because the breadth of the knowledge and expertise, which spans usually beyond the scope of what the corporate operate. Corporate might have like a corporate lawyers who's good at like what they supposed to do in a corporate activity, but like some of the legal implication might go far beyond what we normally operate. Sometimes like the societal implications, we have to think really deep, and then some of the implication might be very far-reaching, and often beyond the scope we usually operate in the corporate world. In order to safeguard like a kind of tunnel vision or like a kind of narrow-minded decision-making, we need a collaboration with a broad range of experts, and usually we look into the academia or non-government organization for that. So like collaboration in between the industry and different sectors. This is a multi-stakeholder issue. I think it's a very critical issue, and I think that's a major similarity in bioethics and AI ethics.
All right, that's very enlightening and super interesting. So Natasha, you already mentioned that you worked with the wider public and also regulators, and of course, Microsoft, as already mentioned, is also extremely active in the research community, especially also in the AI ethics research community. How do you work together with the Microsoft community, but also the larger research community, and what informs your work on these business decisions that you already talked about at Microsoft?
Well, first, I wholeheartedly agree with Kitano-san about this being essentially a whole of society issue that we need to work through. And therefore, we do need to make sure that we are engaging in a very expansive way because, these issues at the end of the day affect all of us as individuals as well. And making sure that there is sort of trust and acceptance for these new frontier technologies does involve a general participation, right? It's not likely to lead to success with innovative new technologies if people feel like they've been left behind. So I think a very inclusive process is a really, really important one, and it definitely involves looking beyond, the four walls of any one organization that we work with. I think like Sony, Microsoft is a research-led company, and I'm really proud and grateful that we have that heritage because I do think it's critically important when it comes to responsible AI practices. And I really think of this relationship between academia and industry as being a very bidirectional one, and in the way that Pascal and Alice have both emphasized as well. On the one hand, we've found it extremely useful to rely on the academic research to help us look around the corners, to help us anticipate what are the next issues that we need to be focused on in building our sort of frontier products. And there's also, I think, an emerging line of research that is focused not just on sort of flagging the issues that might be coming down the line, but also thinking about early ideas about appropriate mitigation for those issues. So that's extremely relevant and important for us to stay across at all times. At the same time, there are real learnings that come from the product building process. And those might be some of the tensions that Pascal referred to earlier. Sometimes tensions do arise, for example, between, approaches to fairness testing and privacy regulations that exist today. These are real problems that we need to work through. So I think it's, industry can provide both, some really helpful insight as to the constraints that need to be worked with in order to, build products that earn people's trust. And at the same time, I think industry can also generate really useful real-world data about how products are landing and how they're actually being experienced. Certainly within Microsoft, we spend a lot of time trying to anticipate the impacts of our technology, and I think that's a critically important process that we need to follow at all times. But it's also true that sometimes when we launch the products, not every dimension of what we anticipated actually comes into fruition. And there might be new and different impacts as well. So I think, remaining grounded in the realities of what we are seeing in the real world and sharing that back and making sure that we're all sort of jointly working on mitigations that are solving, the sorts of problems that we see today and that we can anticipate for the future. This is extremely valuable. And I'm very grateful that we have Microsoft research right on our doorstep with some very cutting edge research coming out of there. But this is research that we value from around the world, and I think that will always be true.
Yeah, and of course, it's a really exciting field in terms of the technology that gets developed, right? Which is in many ways probably just at the beginning and even accelerating at an ever increasing rate with more people coming in and more communities joining the whole endeavor. And so in sort of the final round, I'd love to get the panel's take on the future of AI ethics and AI in general, because in many ways I think we are just at the beginning of this field, right? There are important topics like fairness, accountability, and transparency, and they are obviously here to stay. Similarly, we are, of course, grappling with issues industry-wide and also research-wide in terms of privacy and consent and data sets and so on. So how does the panel see this evolve, and what are the issues that are currently discussed or not discussed enough, or not discussed at all, and what are the challenges that we're not even touching yet? And I'd like to turn it over first to Alice, because you're, of course, at the forefront of research, as well as AI governance for Sony overall. So where do you see future challenges that we should focus on as a community?
Thank you, Mika. So yeah, there's so many things, but I think as you alluded to, we have all of these different elements of AI ethics right now. We have fairness, we have explainability, privacy, security, HCI, all these different components and all these different strands of research, and entire conferences sometimes dedicated to very specific subsets here. And I think as we're moving more towards AI ethics becoming a very mature field and becoming not so much just a separate research discipline, but instead something that should be really baked into the entire AI development process, such that everything becomes more ethical AI rather than it being a separate discipline. That leads to a lot of these questions of how do we actually balance multiple ethical desiderata. So this was something that both Natasha and Pascal alluded to in terms of these tensions that we have. And in terms of my own research agenda, a lot of the focus tends to be on these areas where, say, legal and technical values might be a little bit in conflict in practice. And we can see this in many spaces, for example, in algorithmic fairness when it comes to collecting more large, diverse data sets with sensitive attribute information in order to do fairness assessments. That is directly in conflict with many privacy values around data minimization and also not releasing such confidential information about individuals. We also see similar tensions when you then try to bring in transparency and explainability versus perhaps some security concerns or concerns about people gaming AI systems. And so there are all of these challenges that in practice are very hard for practitioners to balance, but are ultimately what are key to determining whether any sort of product or service actually meets any sort of ethical standard. It's not enough to just say we went 100% in one direction and then in turn lost all of the other ethical desiderata. So I think that's one very key component for focus in terms of the future of AI ethics. And in addition, especially coming from more of a Sony environment, I think it's important for us to consider how to address AI ethics in the context of relatively low risk but pervasive AI systems. And what I mean by that is, especially if we look at the way AI governance has gone, there is this tendency to focus on, for example, maybe restricting or banning certain AI technologies. Many jurisdictions have taken that approach. And that's, on the one hand, very important and solves for certain issues. But it also leaves a large band of AI technologies where there is not very clear regulatory guidance in terms of how do we address the fact that even if they are not a technology that should be significantly restricted or banned, if there are certain lingering ethical issues with them, such as, for example, maybe they don't work well across all different demographics, or they might occasionally produce content that might be offensive in some way. Those are sorts of examples where we still need to take action, and we need to figure out how to have AI governance in those contexts, but there's often a lack of guidance in terms of what we should do there. And I think we see these issues especially emerging now in the generative AI space, where we might be able to bypass some of the legal problems associated with having, for example, real data with instead using synthetic data, or by having AI generate content of its own. But now this raises so many new questions in terms of the relationships between AI and human creators, and how do we ensure that that is appropriately managed and accounts for many more issues in terms of human creativity and how to enhance that rather than replace that. So I think at the end of the day, in terms of the future of AI, we will need to see, can we have our cake and eat it too? And the answers will lie in terms of these questions of balancing these multiple desiderata and ensuring that we can address this across all AI technologies.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. And then Natasha, I think you were probably thinking about similar issues, specifically also because Microsoft obviously is a very unique company with very unique opportunities, very much at the center of AI with the research you're doing, the compute infrastructure, and of course, Microsoft's importance actually to many different industrial and also research domains. So what gets you excited about the future, and what are the things that you're thinking about, that we should pay special attention to?
Well, I'd like to start here by mentioning measurement, which I think is actually very closely related to some of Alice's point. There's the old management adage that you can't manage what you can't measure. And I think this is a real space where we need to invest in significantly for responsible AI or AI ethics practices. If you actually look at all of the benchmarks or many of the benchmarks for state-of-the-art models today, you notice that they actually just measure technical performance, often in terms of precision and recall of various different types of models. I think we need to get to a world where we measure performance and we judge whether something's state-of-the-art in a much more expansive way. And by that, what I mean is we need to be focusing on not just whether the technical performance of the model is state-of-the-art, but is it fair? Does it work equally well for different demographic groups? How is it enhancing the privacy of the people who are using that system? So I think we need to expand our notion of what it means for an AI model to be state-of-the-art, and I think we want to think of that in a really broad sense. I agree with Alice that one of the new frontiers really is generative models, and they do, just as we were sort of starting to find our stride with more traditional sort of predictive models, we are now grappling with a whole new suite of questions when it comes to those generative systems. So at Microsoft, we've released through GitHub a product called Copilot, in which you can add just natural language and generate code. And this is very empowering for our developers, because instead of having to sort of spend a long time on reading APIs or looking on Stack Overflow to find code snippets for your project, you can just actually use natural language to express what it is that you'd like to achieve. And we've seen that product really be embraced by the developer community as sort of taking away the everyday tasks that need to be done and empowering them to focus on the higher priority tasks that they have, which is fantastic. We have also just very recently announced a product called Designer, which actually uses DALL-E, OpenAI's image generation model, to help generate new images in order to place those in your marketing material or other materials you might be pulling together. Now, I think this is both embraces sort of Microsoft's and Sony's values of empowering creativity in lots of really important ways. But in addition to the sort of creator questions that Alice raised, I think we have to ask ourselves hard questions about what does it mean to be in a world where it's increasingly hard to tell the difference between synthetically generated content and a photo that I took in person with my camera. I think it's also really important to make sure that we are thinking expansively about how do we avoid replicating the societal biases of the past in these new generative systems. So these are all fascinating questions, important questions. I think it really comes back to Kitano-san's earlier comment about essentially with great power comes great responsibility, and this is very true. And I think if done well with these new technologies, we can create not just sort of more responsible products, but actually just better products overall. But it is going to require that sort of consistent work of our own organizations within Sony and Microsoft, our collaborations with academia, our involvement of the community at large. So I think if we sort of keep approaching this work with those stakeholders in mind and that commitment, I think we can really harness the power of this technology.
Yeah, I totally agree. Even though I'm just a moderator here, but I mean, many other things that are mentioned already, I think, are extremely important. And I'd like to hand it over to Pascal with the unique leadership in AI ethics research. Are there areas that we should pay special attention to? Are there things that are missing from the things that have already been mentioned, or do you agree with the things that have been mentioned?
So I do want to add another point on AI ethics. The future of AI ethics and governance. As you know, ethics is different from laws, all right? Ethics goes beyond legal requirements. And also that's what makes it difficult because, you know, for engineers, if I just speak as an engineer, I would like nothing less than for the, you know, the lawyers tell me this you can do, this you cannot do, right? And then the rest I just manage myself. But obviously, ethics is way more challenging than that, and it is culturally dependent, context dependent, even application dependent. So what is ethical use of, for example, facial emotion recognition is different depending on the application, the context, cultural context, and so on. So we need to be mindful of that. And in fact, the people who are working on the governance side, meaning the regulators, the lawyers, and so on, they also need to take that into consideration and to come up with regulations and laws that are, number one, let's say non-trivial, and number two, not overfitting. What do I mean by that? Let me use an example. So I was on an expert panel for the United Nations panel on lethal autonomous weapons governance, facing the ambassadors from all 200 member states of the UN. And there we discussed the governance of these weapons in the context of a Geneva Convention. And I was struck by how applicable Geneva Convention is to all weapons, past, current, and future. They're absolutely applicable to the governance of AI weapons even. So, and that is a very, very good set of convention and agreement that all member states sign on to. So I think we should look at how we can come up with ethical guidelines that are, you know, that can get the buy-in from all countries and with different cultural backgrounds and priorities. And they are long-reaching, meaning it's not like today we have these generative models. Tomorrow we'll have something else very, very quickly, right? So we need to have AI governance that is long-reaching and non-trivial. So it's not like something that everybody can do anyways, but yet not overfitting to today's technology. So that is actually, I think, a very, very challenging task for people who work on policy, AI governance. And they need to be very, very made abreast of the development, evolution of AI technology and the future of AI technology. This also means that AI researchers who are looking at, who are actually partaking in the development of AI and its future development need to, again, inform our regulators and our governments and our lawyers of this, the future potential directions. So today I see as an AI researcher a lot of talks on the future of AI directions, right? That's what we do in all the conferences. You will see that, and then I see these governance talks in all the separate venues, and they're not made aware of this, and they're not made aware of that. So I think there's a really need for the future for us to arrive at a state of the world where the governance people and the researchers in AI and AI ethics really have multiple platforms where they can communicate with each other directly. And that will change the field of AI as well as the field of AI ethics. Like Alex and Natasha mentioned, it shouldn't be two separate fields. They should just be together. So that's what I would like to see for the future of AI. That where we develop AI and AI ethics simultaneously in the same context.
Oh, that's really a great message. And I'm sure, and I hand it over to Kitano-san for sort of a final comment here. With the long experience you have an impact on AI, what is your take on how we can bring this together, the research, the engineering, and the governments? And what is your message also to Sony as we continue Sony's leadership in AI, especially also in creative industries that obviously touch many, many people's lives in movies, music, and gaming, and so on?
Yeah, but thank you very much for all the discussion. I think all the great points has been made, and then a very inspiring thought has been exchanged. And I think it takes us quite a bit of imagination and the creativity to imagine what may happen in the future. We have a range of technology today, and then we start seeing the technology like a diffusion model, where that materializes into the stable diffusion, or mid-journey. And that actually people start realizing that, oh my God, I mean, there's some of the creativity things, paintings and all that. Maybe AI will play a more important role than we thought 6 months ago, for example. But I think it's moving very quickly now. But at the same time, some of the research of the mimicking the human voice for the recordings will come to the stage, not just the voice, but also facial image as well, will come to the stage that the last month, Europol submitted a report saying that the criminal evidence may not be valid because that could be the outcome of the deep fake or whatever the recent new AI technology to mimicking somebody, the voice and then images, and then potentially could be almost indistinguishable. But this is actually a threat. But, AI is getting really powerful. If we do the good use of AI, would that open up a new era? There's going to be we can really amplify our creativity, solve the lot of problems that we want to. But at the same time, if that is misuse, we're going to have a serious trouble. But worst consequences, we're going to have a stricter regulation on the AI use. That will actually slow down the progress. That probably not going to end up not benefiting everyone at all. But at the same time, we have to be. But the bad guys are very creative as well. So I think that's the unfortunate reality as well. But at the same time, this is really the multi-stakeholder issues. Everyone, all the like-minded parties get together, have the discussion. And then also this will obviously involve the government parties, the international organizations, the NGO, and then also send a message to everyone that where we should go, and then what is the industry, academia consensus, and then where we're going to work together. But this is the kind of area that the multiple companies or industry, academia can work together, because this will benefit everyone. This is a more common thing that everyone benefits. But I think that is the very important thing. I don't think we have kind of magical solution to this. If we do this and solve everything, it's not gonna be like that. We need to have a continuous dialogue, a continuous exchange of ideas and thought. But I have to be creative in envisioning what will come in the future in a good and a bad way, and then prepared for that. And I think having a forum of discussion this a session, as well as the conference and then organization, I think is great. But I know that Pascal, kind of launching the new AI conference, responsible AI conference as well. And I think that those conference will hope to play a pivotal role in the dialogue, facilitating dialogue. And I expect a lot for the Pascal's new initiative. Pascal, you have something to say on that?
Wow, it is not my initiative, as you know. It's all of our initiative together. So we're co-organizing. You are on the steering committee, Kitano-san, on the new upcoming Responsible AI Summit that's being, that will have the participation of all the top leading AI companies, including Sony, including the companies in China, and also in Microsoft and other Google, Amazon, Meta, all these companies in the Silicon Valley. And we will have that conference in Silicon Valley in spring 2023. After COVID, this will be an in-person meeting, so where we can all be in the same room in person. Natasha, Alice, Kitano-san, I hope we will all be together. We'll be discussing some of these issues that we talked about today, but also some of the more concrete challenges we're facing in terms of how to really implement, ethical AI principles into products and systems and algorithms. So I'm really looking forward to meeting all of you in person and working with you.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Pascal. We work together on this, and I think this is like fundamental things that we will work together to make the world a better place. And after I was appointed as a CTO for Sony, we decided like a mission of the Sony's R&D to be to push our civilization forward and make this planet sustainable. That's a big goal. But include like AI could be the critical part of that, because in terms of pushing our civilization, solving a little problem, and make it make this world a better place. So I hope we can work together. We sure we do, and then hope like we're gonna have like a much better future.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. So I'd like to thank the panel. We are running a little bit out of time, but I didn't want to stop because, of course, these are really important issues, and I'd really like to thank the panel to give very thoughtful and inspiring insights on these core issues in AI and AI ethics today and in the future. And I think the panel made it very clear that this is a special and exciting, but also crucial time actually for the humanity, for the future of humanity, with the huge progress in AI and the many new opportunities and challenges in AI ethics. And so again, I'd like to thank the panel to take time out of their busy schedules to discuss these important topics with us today. And obviously hope that we can continue the discussion as a community of researchers, engineers, lawyers, and also politicians actually to really shape the future of humanity in the best possible way.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.